Oh my goodness. I am super excited to have a guest on that is a seller on Amazon, as well as he even talks about how he sold in many different ways. And he's able to build a business, provide for his family without having a job by buying products and selling products all over the world, in fact. And so, Kevin, thank you so much for being here on the show, on the Successfully Employed show.
Dustin, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I was listening to some of your episodes, and you've got a great spirit, and I like the general flow of this podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really want this show to be where anybody, a regular, normal person, can come on and listen to it and say, hey, I like that idea. Let me try to implement that in my life. And that's the thing about bringing on people like you. They see, I mean, you and I are just normal people, ordinary people that found a way to be extraordinary. And I say extraordinary because most people, ordinary people, have jobs, but we became extraordinary by quitting
Right.
our jobs and providing for
Hmm.
ourselves and our families outside of that. So I want to jump right into it. How do you
Sure.
make money to provide for your family without working a job, a just over broke job?
Yes. So I left the corporate world, and I now basically have three main ways that I make money. One is, as you mentioned, selling goods on Amazon in 9 different countries, including the US, as well as helping people do that as well. One thing I've come to learn is if you start developing a skill set that maybe not everyone understands, and you have kind of a unique little niche or perspective, oftentimes your knowledge becomes valuable to others. And so I've made money and continue to make money helping people there. And then also made money with, we got connected through a mutual friend of ours. His name is Scott Volker. He and I worked together on a conference where we also help people in the e-commerce space with a particular conference. So I would say there's my three main revenue streams for my life.
That's terrific. So you have basically three businesses that are
Mm-hmm.
all working in conjunction. Some are probably a little more hands off, but let's. I want to jump into actually two of them that sound really really interesting. Number one,
Sure.
the selling on Amazon, and number two, I want to get into the conference and that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
let's, if you can, walk us through how we would become a seller on Amazon, and from beginning, like where do we start to sell things on Amazon?
Great question. And it seems like that's a very popular thing these days. Um, on YouTube, you have the ability to turn off ads where they're not tracking you, where it's basically like you're always incognito. And I tend to get two kinds of ads when I watch YouTube because I've turned those ad tracking off, where I get women's girdles, where it's like kind of like a not Spanx, but something similar to Spanx. And then I get how to find a product to sell on Amazon. So uh, it seems like it's all the rage these days. And one thing I would recommend to people is if you're thinking about selling on Amazon, if everyone else is zigging, do a little bit more zagging, because everyone out there is trying to teach this shiny object, the product that's doing $100,000 in sales a month or whatever the case is. But if you, I've created a strategy where I've really created a portfolio of products that themselves, none of them are home runs necessarily, but they add up. And so that would be my general direction: is what can you do to basically serve someone else and what they're looking for, and do it multiple ways and not just with one product or a couple of similar products. I like to go a little wider. That's not everyone agrees with me on that one, but that's my take.
So you have all the products that you sell. They very not necessarily similar, but they're in the same. Like if it's automotive, it's all automotive, or if it's health,
Mm-hmm.
it's all health. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So they're all in the same category, and I have, I want to say, about 85 active SKUs right now on Amazon.com, and then I've taken them and put them into other marketplaces as well.
Awesome. Now, Kevin,
Mhm.
that's a great framework to get started. But how do we even pick the first thing that we start with? Should we go something we're passionate about? And you said zag instead of where people are zigging. How should we find that first product that we should put out there to sell?
Gotcha. So that's the magical question. So the big sticking point for just about everyone who gets into this is, what do I sell? Now there's tools like Jungle Scout. There's other similar tools that'll help you at least kind of figure out potential demand for that type of product. What I would suggest is products that are are selling, getting consistent sales, and not too much competition. And some of that, based on like if you look and see like if everyone is selling, we'll use garlic presses as an example, and the top five all have over 1,000 reviews or something like that. That's probably not a good niche to get into, because think about your own um, purchasing behaviors on Amazon. You're looking for the social proof of how many reviews does this have, and if one has three 5-star reviews and another one has 1,000, which would you as the consumer be more likely to be? So it doesn't mean you have to have a whole bunch of reviews to start off with, but you at least want something where you can kind of be in the ballpark of
Now,
what others are doing.
okay, that makes sense. Now, is it seems like Amazon's been around for a while. I don't think they're going to
Mm-hmm.
go anywhere, which is great for anybody that's trying to get into business. Now, it seems like it. There's so many products on there. I mean, is it too late to jump into this business?
Some people will say that, and I'll say this. So I got started in 2015 selling on Amazon, and that was the big debate back then. Is it too late to get started selling on Amazon? So Amazon ultimately is just a channel. So if you think of it this way, if you start getting good at product development and you can move your units on other channels in addition to Amazon, then that's great. Right now, Amazon's the hot thing. About half of all e-commerce sales in the US are done on Amazon. Well, in 5-10 years, that might change. But worrying about what might happen in 5-10 years isn't going to get you sales and success today. And then whatever you learn today, you can apply down the road. And I think God bless the broken road of all the things I've done along the way that have helped me to get to where I'm at now. And they may not all seem directly related, but whatever you do today could help you down the road, even if things change.
I think that's a great, actually fantastic piece of advice for everybody, because let's say there's another company, Amazon 3.0 or whatever. It's like literally a
Right.
whole different company, but
Mm-hmm.
you've already know like the whole process, maybe the supply chain and how to do
Mm-hmm.
shipping and all that sort of stuff. You already have that understanding. So you could just pivot a little bit or go to another, like if, let's say eBay is now, everybody's going back to eBay or something like that. You can
Exactly.
utilize that.
Exactly. And the thing of it is at the end of the day, Amazon is no different than, let's say, an open air market 2,000 years ago. People have a need for something. You have a product to sell. And so at a certain point, the amount of money they have in their hand that they possibly might give up the value of your product essentially has to meet or exceed what they're willing to pay for it. And as long as you can get the two to balance out, it's going to work out. And it's the same thing on Amazon, except just some of the tactics you use are just a little different. But ultimately, we forget about this, but there's real people on the other side of the keyboard that have real hopes and dreams, real desires, and they're trying to solve some real need with whatever it is they're buying. And if you think of it from your own standpoint, that's what you do when you buy something. So whoever the listener is, think of how you're buying things and try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who might buy whatever it is you're thinking about selling.
I think that's a fantastic point. Anytime in business, if you could put yourself in your customer's shoes or
Mm-hmm.
the person that you're servicing, you're taking care of, put yourself in their shoes and think like they're going to think and walk them through the process or provide them whatever it is they need, you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
a much better, more quality sale and they're going to come back, I think. It's because you're really helping them out. So that's great advice. Now, what I think is if you're going to go ahead and start selling on Amazon, it's very similar. It's just as with eBay or other sites. I mean, they probably make it fairly easy. So I don't want to dive into that. But what I really want to dive into is the
Mm-hmm.
supply chain and basically how do you ship everything to your house and then package them up and send them out? What's the process? Once you find the product, you know what you want. You already have Amazon set up and you know you want to get started selling, but you found the product. What do we do after we know we want to sell this product? What do we do next?
So I'm a bit of a control freak, so my answer might be a little different than some people, but I generally have sent everything, especially for North America, to my house. And then I send it into Amazon either in the US or the Canada from my house. Now, outside the US, I have to send it into, wherever I'm sending it to. And a lot of people try to set their businesses up so that they send it directly to Amazon. I'm just maybe again, I'm just a control freak, which we'll get into later because I work. It's probably my convention background. I'm just too much into like making sure everything is perfect, which sometimes hinders me. I'll admit, but At the end of the day, what it comes down to is for what most people do is at least on their first shipment, send it into their house or someplace they can physically see it with their eyeballs. And then once they get a comfort level and trust, then start working on hopefully, either sending it into a prep center or have a freight forwarder do something um, with their product before sending it into Amazon, or they just send everything directly into Amazon. But I would say work up to that comfort level, because you don't want to send something directly into Amazon on your first shipment and it turns out like 20% of them are all broken, and somebody could have caught that before it went into Amazon. So that's my suggestion.
Got it. Because yeah, quality control. I mean, as soon as you start selling bad products, you start getting 1 stars, and those
Mm-hmm.
will definitely. It seems like they would like. I don't buy when there's like a 3 star, when there's a 4.5 star someplace else. I would
Oh,
definitely,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because to your point, like it's all about comparison. I mean, it's the social proof, and Amazon has done a phenomenal job of having that social proof element of you can look and see like, okay, this has X number of stars, this number of ratings, whatever, and that that becomes important to people is like what do others think, and if you think about it, like they don't even know who these people are, but they just trust that when they see that, like, oh, this has 3.5 stars, this has 4.5 stars, which one am I more likely to buy?
That's great. Now, how would you scale that business to, while they're selling, just some products here and there and making some good money? How do you scale
Mm-hmm.
it to where you can actually quit your job for, or can you?
Yeah, you can. And it's one of those things. It's definitely not get rich quick. It's not an overnight thing. Think of it as a snowball. So the snowball rolls down the hill and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's really, you're using the laws of compounding in your favor. So in an ideal way, if you think of it, every dollar you're putting in to buying a product, if you can get $2 out, then you just compounded 100%. And if you can do that 2.5 to 4 times a year, your money over time is going to grow and grow and grow. And then if you can, you know, as it as you start purchasing more products and putting more money into not just reordering, but also now let's try another product and let's try another product and let's try another product. And some are going to work and some aren't. In fact, one of my biggest duds that it took me about a year and a half to sell through. I created a product to sell with it, like as a bundle, basically, and that product didn't work out at all. But the component that was going to be part of the bundle actually ended up being my best selling product, and I wouldn't have known that if I didn't try it.
That's a great point. Now, I love the idea of selling on Amazon, especially right now. In the history of the entire world, it's never been so easy to start a business and start
Mm-hmm.
making money. It's just absolutely fantastic with technology. Now, I want you to take us back before you started the selling on Amazon, before you started everything, and you had a
Mm-hmm.
regular job. What were you doing as a regular job?
Great question. So I was climbing the corporate ladder, and I always had this entrepreneurial itch. Like I remember as a kid actually going door to door with a tray of like Kool-Aid and like Dixie cups and trying to sell them for a quarter to people and stuff like that. I'm sure people just bought it just to humor me because I was, 8 or whatever. And so I've always had an itch, but then I got into like, I really thought the right path was to climb the corporate ladder, get a college degree, climb the ladder, blah, 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 blah. And I don't disparage that. Like I said before, God bless the broken road. So I was working in the hospitality industry and I was working at a hotel, and we'll actually go back a few years before that. On eBay, I went and I bought 2 Nike 4 Woods because I was going to flip them. And this is probably 04,
Those
05.
are
I don't
golf
even
clubs,
know.
right?
Oh, yeah, golf clubs. So if you think about it, most people have a driver, a 3 Woods, and a 5 Woods. Well, nobody has a 4 Woods. I thought I was buying them for $40 and I was going to sell them for $400 because I went on Nike.com and they were selling, or the MSRP, the manufacturer's suggested retail price was $400. So I thought, oh, I'll sell it. I'll make tons of money. I'm just going to keep doing this over and over again. And then something after I, received them said, well, let's go on eBay and look and see what else they're selling it for. Well, everyone else was selling them for about $40. So I did what a lot of people do, nothing. And I regret that because I lost at least 10 years between 04, 05, whichever it is, and 2015 when I get back into the game. But when I was working a regular corporate job, and just more dreaming about trying something, but not actually pulling the trigger, I was working in a hotel. It was a large hotel. We had a big convention center, and I was basically kind of like middle management. And I was managing a team of people who managed events. And we got bought out by a bigger company. And I remember one day, um, there was a lot of pressure to cut costs and whatnot. And we got this email from the general manager saying, all management report to a meeting at 8 a.m. the next morning. And this was at 5 p.m. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so like, we're all getting into each other's offices. What's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? And we go in there and there was like some celebration about the fact that like guest satisfaction scores from some survey were like up from the previous quarter. I'm like, they've never done anything like that. I was like, are you kidding me? You brought us in here for this? So I go back to my office thinking, oh, okay, I'm safe. Everything's good. Knock on my door. My boss comes to me and says, hey, Kevin, do you have a minute to come meet with her and her boss? And I was like, oh, no problem. We were having meetings about meetings all the time. So I thought nothing of it. So we go into this conference room, open the door. Her boss is there just as expected. Across the table is the head of human resources. And she was never at the meetings. So I was like, this isn't good. So basically, they gave me the opportunity to either apply for other jobs within the company or take a severance package. And I decided, although they were trying to suggest I apply for a different job, that I go into I decided I was going to go into try something different. So I went and worked for a friend of mine's insurance agency, and I love them to death. And it was a great experience working at that insurance agency. But they went through all kinds of rapid growth while I was there. And it was like I was watching, you hear that cliche, working for someone else's dreams. I've truly felt, and I was seeing it firsthand, I was working for someone else's dreams. I'm very happy for them. I want to be very clear. I'm very happy for their dreams and how well things worked out for them. But it was like one of those things. It was like, well, if I'm going to be working this hard, and I should be working on my own dreams. So I just happened to be looking through iTunes at podcasts, and I came across, because I was a entrepreneur at the time. And I happened to find the Amazing Seller podcast by Scott Volker, who now is a good friend of mine, but at the time I had no idea who this guy was. And he was walking through step by step how to sell on Amazon. And I was like, this is interesting. So I decided, let's go ahead and test it out. And here we are today.
That's fantastic. And so you took that history. Now I'm going to fast forward to,
sure.
You also did a conference with Scott, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, that's fantastic. Well, first, Scott, you did this conference. Says, yeah, but it wasn't all me. Like, I have a great guy that actually has done this before and done it many times. So can you walk us through? Well, I'll give you an example. So with Successful Unemployed, I would like
Mm-hmm.
to see a conference come out of this, maybe in like 3 or 4 years, to where
Sure.
it's basically bringing people together that want to be successfully unemployed and
Mm-hmm.
having brainstorming or lessons or sessions, and also vendors, like really just bringing everybody together so that they can say, hey, there's another way than working a job. How would let's walk me through, like, coach me, how would I get to that point if let's say I'm ready, I have the audience, I want to start the conference. What do I do to get started?
Great question. So I'm going to go back just a moment on that. So let's talk about having a job, and like all the thousands of times my boss would ask me to go to their office, his or her office. And, usually in that walk to the office, I was like freaking out, or like that uncertainty feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired, thinking worst case scenario. And then, it only happened one time. It was actually the worst case scenario. But that kind of feeling goes through our minds as entrepreneurs almost all the time. And I'd met Scott, I'd been on his podcast, and I was talking to him, and he said that he wanted to do more to help people in the intermediate to advanced range. And I remember like going back to my hotel room that night, and this was at a conference, and thinking, he should do a conference. And then part of me is telling myself, well, who are you to ask him that? He's just going to say no. So I ended up, mustering the courage to ask him, thinking like, he's going to be mad or he's going to like be rude or mean. Like he's the nicest guy in the world.
Yes.
He's not going to be mean. But it's like those doubts that we tell ourselves. And so if you're thinking about whether it's have a conference or anything else, challenge those doubts in your head because most of the time they're just nonsense. And so if you're thinking about having a conference, the first thing you got to do is decide where to have it and whether it's going to be at a hotel, at a, somewhere else. My experience was in hotels. I understand hotels. I probably was both the ideal client to work with for a hotel and also a monster at the same time because they couldn't pull anything past me because all I used to do in my last job was fix problems. So with hotel conferences, so I could foresee anything that could possibly happen. So if you don't have that experience, one of the things you could do is you could reach out to, there's companies that will help you sign the contract. So for example, we worked with a group called Groups 360. They're a company who basically negotiated the contract, doesn't cost us anything, and they get a commission from the hotel. So they basically act like as a travel agent, but for a larger block of rooms than a travel agent would. And I know the folks at Groups 360. They're actually former colleagues of mine from the hotel I worked at, and some of them left and started this company. They do a really good job. So you got to figure out where you're going to have it, and you got to get a contract. And the thing about when you have a contract is usually you're on the hook for a couple things: rooms and food and beverage. Because at the hotel, they're going to say, we're going to block out a certain number of rooms and we're going to hold meeting space for you. So in order for us to do that, you have to promise us something. So basically, and there's all kinds of terms and conditions of how you can negotiate and structure it. But basically, you have to have like food and beverage and room. So that has to add up to something that in their mind is worthwhile. So it goes back to the open air market. What you have to offer has to be more valuable. So they have space. And so you have to come up with a contract that makes sense for both parties. And it truly becomes a partnership. And then once you have the contract, now you got to get people there. So it's like once you feel like, oh, I got the contract and everything's there, it's not just like Field of Dreams where you build it and they will come. You gotta figure out how to market it. So, with Scott, he had a list of people. Well, even that, it takes some selling to get people to an event. And at the time, we didn't have like we have now testimonials and footage of the actual event, what it looked like. We had like a sales page that's kind of like, hey, here's what it's going to be. And, some of it is we had to at times do what doesn't scale and jump on the phone and, hey, you sound like you're interested. Or would you like to do this? Because sometimes people need a little nudge or they have extra questions they want to ask. But eventually you got to get the folks in the seats. And then also to make it profitable, you want to make sure that you have sponsors. Now, the thing with sponsors, they want people there. So you have a little extra pressure to make sure you get people there. So we ended up with about 200 people there and had 8 or 9 sponsors. And everybody had a great time. And some of it is, the feel of the event, because what it all comes down to with an event is you want people to take away some kind of feeling, because most of the time when you go to a conference, do you really remember much of what the speaker said? Maybe you have some notes, some takeaways, but it's really more, how did you feel about it? And so some of that is done with music, with speakers, with lighting, with getting people to connect, because that's one of the things people really remember that they don't necessarily realize they want. They think they want, what we've come to find is people want content. They want to learn stuff. But what they really take away are the relationships, and they don't realize the value in the networking until they've been there. People that have been to several conferences usually recognize that. So just in general, another side tip here, if you're going to a conference, put as much effort into networking as you possibly can, because at the end of the day, the value of a conference is bringing together people, whether they're people that are, looking to leave their jobs or they're successfully unemployed or whatever it is, that people that won't normally get together in a room because they're not normally surrounded by each other. Because when you have a job, you're surrounded by people that work in the insurance business or the hotel business or whatever type of business. But when you're outside of the job, you have to seek that out. And so bringing people together is the true value in it.
That's a
That was a very
fantastic point.
long-winded answer. So I
No,
hope I answered it.
that's so. I want to do a quick recap, but I want to quickly touch on the networking aspect. I
Mm-hmm.
100% agree. So whenever I go to conferences, and usually I go to about two, maybe three a year, different conferences. I literally don't go to any sessions anymore, and because I always
Mm-hmm.
get the package where I can watch them later if I ever wanted to. But the value is in the networking, is in working with other people, seeing what they're doing, what has worked or what hasn't worked, and you may
Mm-hmm.
be being on their podcast or whatever it might be. But like you're working with other people. I found my business has just gone so much better, exploded after networking and finding more people. So that's what I love to do is network because it just helps my business grow so much. Now, so in starting a conference, we have to find the location. Correct. We have to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what city we're going to be in. Is there
Mm-hmm.
any magic to that? But it just sounds like figure out a good city that would have a decent price on the hotel.
That's a great question. And there's probably a little more art to that than you may think. So, for example, we had our conference in September and we're holding it again in September. And the thing to keep in mind is what else could happen in September. So, I live about 40 minutes north of West Palm Beach. Well, 3 out of the last 4 years, I've had to put the hurricane shutters up on my house because we have hurricanes here. And if a hurricane came in, even though you have some clauses that protect you, it would be a disaster. Even if there was a hint that hurricanes might happen and people are canceling and flights might cancel or whatever, or people are stranded. I mean, it would be a disaster. So we didn't want to be anywhere near a coastal area. Um, Outside of hurricane season, Florida is usually a pretty good place to be. Some of it is, you may want to think about like time of year and what the weather might be, what might attract people there, because sometimes also just the city you're in could attract people because maybe they want to stay a day or two on the back end. So I don't want to badmouth any towns, but just think of your own travel. Like, where would you want to go? Then, what you also may want to think about is there's certain towns that are more known for um, being a little bit more expensive. And so, generally speaking, like if hotel room, you just go on like Travelocity and you look up rooms, and you're not going to get probably the same rates. Maybe you get better rates, maybe you don't. But you could at least look and see, like, New York is probably going to be super expensive. Um, and there's probably lots of union rules that make it extra expensive to have a conference. Chicago is kind of the same thing. Whereas Fort Worth or Charlotte or Orlando, maybe it's not the same case and maybe the room rates are better. And then you also want to like make sure it's in a place where there's good air traffic coming into it. Like we were in Fort Worth, so we're near Dallas Fort Worth and Love Field, so we had two big airports. Our future conferences are going to be in other places that have big airports and things like that. So I'll just use Lubbock, Texas, where I went to school. Yeah, there's an international airport there, but I don't know of places that could fit what we were looking to do. I don't know that there's a lot of flights in and out, especially flights that are nonstop. So those are things I would think about. So keep it in a city that's pretty good. Like where you're in
Phoenix.
Arizona,
Yeah,
right?
I'm in Phoenix.
Phoenix. Okay. Phoenix is a great location for conferences. Just because great hub for an airport.
And
The
price.
weather's good.
And weather's
The
good in the
price
winter.
is
Yeah.
good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So all kinds of factors work in that. Phoenix is a very good conference city. And, like I said, if you're not 100% sure, talk to a company. It doesn't have to be Groups 360. I don't want to just pitch them, but talk to some company that does that and they can help you with that kind of thing.
Man, that's great. Okay, so we find a city, then we get a company, and I am a firm believer in paying a company that would do something that would either take me a lot of time or I would lose
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money doing something that I don't know what I'm doing. So after I've done like 10 conferences and I've looked at 10 different contracts and I know I might be able to do it myself, but I
Right.
know a gentleman who has he runs FinCon. Have you heard of FinCon?
Oh yeah. I've heard of FinCon.
Yeah,
I haven't been, but I've heard good things.
great conference. I was talking to PT, the owner of FinCon, and he still uses, and it's been like 10 years, he still uses a company that negotiates and does all that stuff for him because he saves a lot of money. And I'm kind of thinking, man, I got to pay somebody to do it, but it's so much better getting somebody else. So I think it's a great idea. Now from there, you need to make sure that you have enough, like whatever hotel says block this many rooms. You got to guarantee that. So that's money that you're going to have to write a check for. Is that correct?
Possibly. So generally speaking, there's two ways to go about rooms. So it could be either the rooms are they're being paid for by the group, or the groups are what they call on own. So like most conferences in the entrepreneurial space, your room is on your own. And then, like with, for example, with Brand Accelerator Live, we paid for our speakers, we paid for our audio visual techs, a couple other folks, core staff and things like that. We paid for rooms, but for the most part, everyone else was on their own. The hotel doesn't really care who's paying for it. They just want to know that a certain percentage of the rooms that they've blocked get picked up. So as long as it gets picked up, you don't owe what they call attrition, which is basically just, if let's say you have 300 rooms and you have to pick up 80%, as long as you pick up at least 240 rooms that are paid for, you're fine. If you only do 220, then that difference of 20, depending on how your contract's worded, you'd have to potentially pay.
Got it. Got it. Now, what about food too? Because that's something you mentioned. Is it you have
Mm-hmm.
to get food, or is that something that you could also negotiate?
Yeah. So the way it generally works with hotels is if you're in more of a peak season, the more they're going to hold you to a higher food and beverage minimum. And then, food and beverage could be, maybe you have a bar, or maybe you have a VIP reception. It doesn't necessarily have to be for everyone. Now, what I'll say is time of year could be a difference, because let's say you have a conference and, well, let me take a step back. Generally speaking, meeting planners like to have conferences when kids aren't out of school, because if you're attending a conference and your kids are out of school, and it's a chance you could go on vacation with your kids or go to the association of whatever's conference, what are you more likely to do? You'd say, I want to spend the time with my family. So meeting planners don't like to do summers, Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, times when people would normally be on vacation, because people are less likely to attend the conference. Now, in the entrepreneurial space, maybe summertime might be a good time to do it. Maybe it isn't. It depends. So the reason I'm bringing that up is oftentimes you can get more favorable rates, as far as the room rates might be lower, maybe your attrition is lower, your minimum for food and beverage is lower, but generally speaking, you got to bring something to the table. And so if you don't have food and beverage, they may charge your attendees more for rooms. And if they're charging your attendees more for rooms, so instead of maybe $189 a night, maybe it's $250 a night. Well, you might have less people pick up rooms because of that. So it's one of
So
those things you end up kind of
yeah,
paying it one way or the other.
the hotel basically wants to make sure that they're making the money that they need for the
Exactly.
block. Okay, got it. Now, if from there we already have a contract, we're already ready to
Mm-hmm.
go. How do you go and find? Because I've heard from PT from FinCon, he says, and you, I think you mentioned this earlier, that you make a lot of the profit, or the majority of the profit, when you have sponsors or people
Mm-hmm.
that companies that come. How do you find those ones to make sure? Because I know that there are probably some that I could think off the top of my head, but there are probably some that I have no clue about. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with Scott, the nice thing was, and he's built a really great relationship with his audience over time. And some of his audience are people that own companies. Maybe they've been on his show. And so whether we reached out to them or they reached out to us, and then as well as, we went to conferences and we chatted with some folks, who would be potentially comparable type companies that might be interested in, sponsoring our event too. And it's one of those things where it's like, we look at a lot of other events and every year their sponsorship list tends to grow. And I think some of that is the conference grows and people have heard of it more, sponsors are more likely to go to it. We thankfully were profitable the first year. I've heard of a lot of conferences that maybe aren't profitable the first year, because I think with the conference, it's not a huge moneymaker, and oftentimes for the meeting or for whoever owns it, but it's a great relationship building tool. And so over time, it can be very profitable. And I think some of it is just how you manage the costs, as well as just making sure that, you're creating a good attendee experience, which also leads to a good experience for the sponsors. And so you just kind of got to look at it as like all together. Again, hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, I think you did. And that's something that as I go to other conferences, I could even just go to their website and see who's sponsoring them and see,
Absolutely.
yeah, see what is a similar type of conference or that would have a bit somewhat same niche and
Mm-hmm.
go and just talk to those and say, hey, I have a conference, or I'm starting a conference. So that's a great way
Sure.
to do it. Is there anything that we might have missed? I know now running the conference, a whole another ball of wax, like actually, the nuts and bolts of getting the speakers on
Sure.
stage, that we don't need to get
Mm-hmm.
into that. But is there anything we missed on building up to the actual date that you go live? Is there anything we could have missed out on?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So generally speaking, they'll buy their ticket before they get their airfare, and then after they get their airfare, rooms tends to be one of the last things. So there's a usually most hotel contracts have what they call a cutoff date, which what happens after the cutoff date, which is usually about a month out from the conference, things aren't as guaranteed anymore. So you're no longer in control of your room block anymore. So like if they have a pharmaceutical company books, last minute that has higher room rate and higher whatever, they might just say, sorry to you and your attendees, we're booking these. Oh, and by the way, you still have a bill for what you owe us. Yeah. So depending on how it's structured, that could happen. So you want to make sure that people are booking their rooms ahead of time because people are procrastinators. I mean, it's just normal. Like, you book your room last and you think like, oh, it's no big deal. It's a conference. They booked rooms, whatever. And then, they're trying to book it 3 days out. So you want to try to encourage people as much as you can. If you can incentivize them, maybe with some sort of group Facebook live coaching or something like that. Maybe anything you can do to get people. We had another thing is I would recommend doing some sort of Facebook group for the group, so that way you can get people chatting before they get there, and that helps because a lot of people are very introverted, and if they at least have some familiar face, even if it's just they've seen words that this person has typed, and they've kind of people generally start looking at each other's Facebook profiles and stuff like that. So they kind of feel like they know each other a little bit before they get on site. That's helpful. And then anything you can do to encourage people to mingle with one another. I highly recommend that.
That's great. I love it. Now, you've given us loads and loads of great information. Is
Sure.
there, I want to jump into now the rapid fire round.
Okay.
Now, the rapid fire round is basically, I'm just going to ask you these general questions. You should be able to answer them off the top of your head. So,
Okay.
the first one is if you were to go back and start from scratch, maybe let's say 25 years ago, you're going to give
Mm-hmm.
yourself one piece of advice. It's going to be whatever it is. What would you give yourself advice wise for getting a future without having a job and being successfully unemployed?
Don't get in your own way. And I'll just use those Nike golf clubs as an example. If I had at least sold them, if I lost money or broke even, think of what I would have learned and the traction I would have gotten. I lost 10 years that I'll never get back in my entrepreneurial journey. And that compounding factor would have been huge. And so I gave in to the doubts. And so the times I've not given into the doubts, because they're always going to be there, but the times I don't give into them, I generally tend to do really well. And the times I give into them, I look back with regret.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I like that if I just get started, if I just make myself do it, I'll figure it out as I go. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's exactly what I do. Okay, so what would you give advice wise? It could be, if it's the same, I completely understand. Advice wise for somebody that wants to get into the business of selling and selling on Amazon, selling on eBay, but selling online, what advice would you give them?
Think long term. Don't get into this and fall for the, oh my gosh, I got, you could have a Lamborghini in 6 months and all this stuff. Like most of that is smoke and mirrors. But there are people, I will tell you this now, having been in this business for a long time, there's people that are doing very, very, very well for themselves. And oftentimes you don't hear about them. You don't know who they are. They're just quietly crushing it. And if you just think of it as, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do the best I can and crush it. And I'm going to learn. I'm going to make mistakes along the way. But as long as I keep trying, I'm not failing. Just keep moving forward.
I love that. I think you're absolutely right. I wouldn't be here today if I would have, stopped at any point. With my real estate that I have 30 plus properties, and I literally
Yeah.
don't need to work just because money keeps rolling in. So I completely agree. Okay, so Next question. What
Mhm.
tools or apps, I mean, it could be an app on your phone, it could be like a power tool. Like, what tools
Sure.
would you suggest that we should utilize in our lives?
Oh, what tools should you use in your lives? That is a good question. I really got to think on that here for a second. Um, I would say pen and paper. And the reason I say that is I was like about to say, oh, my phone. It's, all those things I can do on it. But I was like, you know what? It becomes such a distraction where I've come to learn there's a magic when you put pen to paper. Like as we're recording this, my this weekend, my wife and kids are away at Legoland right now, and I was planning on taking some time and really focusing on my goals. And I pulled a journal from probably 4 or 5 years ago when I was just getting back started into the entrepreneurial journey, and like looking at what I wrote down and what's come to fruition. Like it gives me so much confidence moving forward to look back at that. So if you can have something tangible that you can keep and it's some way you can hold on to it, like I really think there's something about the pen to the paper and the muscle movement of your hand that you don't get when you type stuff.
I absolutely agree with that. And in fact, I think it was maybe, I don't know, maybe 5 or so years ago, my kids were getting into school and I was seeing articles that were coming out a little bit about how you remember better, you think better when
Mm,
you're actually writing it out. And that's something that's lost now with the people that are growing up now with everything on
right.
electronics, computers and phones and everything. You're not getting that brain thought and the hand muscle memory and writing everything out. And I remember things that I wrote by hand many years ago, as opposed to
Hmm.
things I just typed this morning. It's like I just typed them out. It
Right.
just, oh, I can't remember what it was. But yeah, there's something about writing it down. I love that
Hmm.
idea. So that's great. Now, here's the last question. What is one nonfiction book that you would recommend? It could be business, it could be anything in nonfiction space that we should read.
I'm going to say the compound effect. And I literally just finished it again the other day because I think that one got my mind at the beginning of this entrepreneurial journey. And I go back and I review it maybe once a year just because Darren Hardy, former publisher of Success Magazine, he really outlines the fact it's not big things that you do, it's the little things you do day to day that compound over time. And like I was saying before, business is not a get rich quick scheme, but when you keep inching forward every day, you will get the football down the field and score the touchdown, so to speak. But you won't get it if you're not inching forward.
The compound effect. I'm going to definitely have to look that one up. Great. Well, Kevin, you've given us so much great information, great wisdom. How can anybody, if they want to reach out to you to learn what you're doing, get more information out of you and listen to your podcast, how would they be able to find you?
Absolutely. Thank you. I do have a podcast and a YouTube channel called Maximizing E-commerce, where I basically bring on people who are subject matter experts in e-commerce, or people that are successful sellers, or sometimes I just get on and I share some of what I've learned along the way, because I've had a lot of great people help me and it's my way of giving back to others.
That's great. And what was that one more time? What's the .com?
Oh, Maximizing E-commerce. You can go to maximizingecommerce.com, or you can look up on YouTube or whatever app you use for podcasts and just look up Maximizing E-commerce.
Fantastic. Kevin, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with all of us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dustin. Appreciate you having me.
All right, Matt, take care.